Well, hello there and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm your host, Cindy. And just before we dig into our episode today, I'm really glad that you're here. I wanted to share some ways that we can work together if you're looking to up-level your negotiation skills. I've got everything from online to group to my signature one-on-one mastermind and VIP experiences available to help you leverage your innate power to get more of what you want and deserve in life. So if that sounds interesting, do go to our website, artoffemininenegotiation.com, and check that out. But now to the reason that you are all here today, let me introduce you to Christina Alicia Campbell, and we're going to be talking about the ABCs of negotiation. So welcome, Christina. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And for those of you who don't know her, Dr. Christina Alicia Campbell, she's a tenured associate professor at the University of Cincinnati. She earned her master's and her PhD in psychology from Michigan State University. And as if that wasn't enough, she completed a postdoctoral fellowship in the Department of Psychiatry at none other than Yale University as well. So Christina, why don't we start off? Tell us how you came to do this line of work.
Yes, so I was a first generation college student, and there are two big pieces or two big components that allowed me to earn my doctorate, and that was unfortunately student loans and mentorship. It took me 13 years from the start of my career when I showed up at San Diego State as a freshman in college to my completion of my postdoc. It was a 13-year process. So it wasn't a smooth process, but it ended in about 6 figures worth of debt.
Yeah.
And so one of the events that was a game changer for me was during graduate school. I had an advisor and he sat me down and showed me the power of $500 and said that if I could negotiate $500 more than what was being offered, these were the implications it had on future promotions, raises, my retirement. So he planted a seed early on that let me know that I needed to negotiate. I didn't know how at the time, but I knew I needed to learn about negotiating. Fast forward, I was completing my postdoc, and it was my first opportunity to receive and complete a negotiations workshop or course. And during the course, I was so excited, but I was let down a bit. I was a bit disappointed because it was a lot about budgets, university budget cuts, and all of the limitations that are involved in negotiating. And it didn't allow me to really experience tangible steps I could take to leverage more salary. And so during that session, I raised my hand. Some of my colleagues around the table still laugh at me today, but I raised my hand. I was like, I hear what you're saying. I hear that money is tight at universities for these academic positions, but I can't eat a computer. And in the room, a lot of people chuckled and laughed. But still today, some of my colleagues will tell me, we can't eat a computer. But a few people followed me to my office at the end of that class or seminar. And they said, I want to do whatever you decide to do. Wow. And it was at that moment I created a game plan to really figure out what I was going to do when I was transitioning from postdoc into a faculty position and how I was going to navigate communicating my wants and needs as I transitioned into academia. And so that was the start of me really honing in. The seed was planted in graduate school, but I really began to take action once I completed my postdoc because I was very motivated to become debt-free.
Yeah, I love that. And boy, can I resonate with the student loans. And I'm dating myself here, but I was saying I'm a first generation sort of post-secondary as well. And lots of student loans racking up as I went through university and law school. And when I graduated, the interest rate at the time was 18%. So as I say, I'm dating myself because that was a long time ago now. It was unprecedented interest rates off the chart. And back then you couldn't then just go to a bank and renegotiate. You were stuck in that loan template until you paid it off. And boy, that was painful at 18%. That dogged me for many, many years. Now, I'd love if you could explain, I was intrigued by this idea about the 500 hours. So explain a little bit more. What is that concept about negotiating the 500 hours?
Yeah, so it was $500. So he said for every $500 increase I got in my salary, he showed how there's a percentage of our salary in these positions that go towards retirement. And so he showed me the compound effects of just a $500 increase.
That's
So that really planted a seed. What if it was $1,000 increase? What
yes.
would $5,000 do? And so I was highly motivated. I just didn't have the tangible skills at the time to
Yeah.
figure out what to do. I knew I needed to negotiate the best possible salary.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. And thanks. I'm glad I asked because I totally misheard that. So that makes a load of sense to me. Now, I know you're the author and illustrator of the ABCs of Negotiating, which for anybody who can see out there, I'm holding it up for our viewers. Just love this book. I love the idea about it. So tell me a little bit about it. What was the genesis of the book?
Yeah, so the book was actually inspired by children's book. A lot of times I have students and faculty who will contact me and say, I got an offer. What do I do next?
Yeah.
A lot of textbooks and books on Amazon, negotiation books, one don't really focus on individuals in academia and they are dead. And so you cannot quickly get through them to be able to quickly apply the skills right away on how to negotiate. So I was actually inspired by children's book. I wanted someone to be able to read the book over a cup of coffee or over breakfast, and
Yeah.
they immediately learn a strategy, a skill, or a mindset shift that needed to happen in order to have a conversation with the employer about their wants and needs.
Yeah.
And so the ABCs of negotiating was me trying to provide a quick, tangible fix where they would be able to understand the qualities of like a star negotiator.
Yeah. And I loved it. It's funny you say that because when I first saw it, I thought, oh my gosh, this is a negotiating book for children. What a great concept. And then as I opened it up and read it, I'm like, oh no, this is some real content here for adults, but what a great delivery method. I thought that was fabulous. Now you've talked a bit about negotiating and sort of being in academia, which is a whole world unto itself for negotiating. So I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your experience as a woman negotiating in what historically was predominantly a male world, at least the top paying positions in that world. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yes, so my training is in psychology, but I actually do research in juvenile justice and child welfare. And so criminal justice as a field is still very male dominated. It's not uncommon for men to have various roles as practitioners or even in academia. When you look at those in leadership roles, you also see that still it's a pretty male dominated field. But I also had a lot of experience where many of my mentors were men as well. And so it did allow me to sort of have a comfort, and I was always familiar with exactly how they negotiated. I had years of observing.
Yeah.
And I do think that there are real differences between men and women. And the person who planted the seed around the $500 increase and the implications of that was a man. This same advisor would hear about an offer I received and said, walk away. And so it was those mentors who really taught me a lot about negotiating. But as a woman, and even as a Black woman in the field, which is even more of a subgroup, negotiating really starts with really having comfort around your vision. And so as an individual in academia, I have to be very clear on who I am in terms of service, because that's what I'm evaluated on, who I am in terms of teaching, and who I am in terms of research. Yeah. And that gives you the confidence, regardless of your background, to really have meaningful conversations that will allow you to communicate that vision so that you can truly determine what resources are available within that setting that can help you carry out your vision.
Yeah, such great advice. And there's so much packed in there. Christina, I want to unpack a little bit about that, because when you talked about gender, I love talking about the elephant in the room. I think it's so important to have these discussions. Now, women do tend to be more likely to shy away from negotiating generally for a whole host of reasons, many tied to social conditioning, and even more so in advocating for themselves. So do you have any advice for women in that category, women who do find that they shy away or find it challenging to advocate for themselves?
Yeah, one of the reasons that I have found that women are concerned about negotiating has a lot to do with how they believe they will be perceived.
Yes.
And so they're trying to minimize feeling as though that they will join a job and they will say, well, this person is demanding, or this person is a lot, and you can fill in the blank and define what that means. I think what is most important is sort of twofold: remembering that the individual is excited to have you in their space. And you've got the interview for a reason. And so what's important is that you maintain that level of enthusiasm and just remain in confident that they are very interested in having me here.
And so tied to that, one of the other things I wanted to unpack about what came from your talking about your academic experience is you had mentioned about gender differences between, men and women in negotiating. I'd love if you could dig a little deeper on that. What's been your experience of the kind of gender differences that you see?
Yeah, I think a big gender difference that I see in negotiating, and I'll preface this by saying that I've been on both sides of negotiating. I have been the person who's interviewed, and I have seen missed opportunities
Yeah.
across men and women who are being interviewed for a faculty position. One story that comes to mind the most, it happened the same way for two people, a man and a woman who was interviewing for a job. They were made aware of what the budget was. And when it was time to suggest a range, the gentleman suggested a range that was slightly above the budget number, and the woman suggested a range that was slightly below. And that always surprises me because they both received the same data on what the budget would allow for. And the woman, I guess, thought that maybe she had another goal to save the university money, or maybe did not want to come off demanding. So she just assumed that she was doing something maybe in good faith, while the gentleman was actually able to land at the actual number just because he went higher in terms of range. So confidence goes a long way. If you have information about budget numbers, use that information to your advantage and be okay with knowing that number and even suggesting something above what is being offered or budgeted for.
So important. And I'll just piggyback on that because it certainly in the research I've done, women one of the important tenets of negotiation is to set those high aspiration levels. And I always add to that, I call it the law of expectation, because you can set aspiration levels all you want, but you also have to expect that you're going to be able to achieve it. And women tend on both fronts, we set lower aspiration levels for ourselves. And again, it goes back, I believe, to a lot of the conditioning about feeling less than, not asking for what you want, not wanting to seem like we're bragging on ourselves, right? But we also have those lower expectations about what we ought to achieve, which maybe isn't that surprising when wasn't that long ago we weren't allowed to vote or hold property or credit. So I mean, I get it, but it is frustrating to see women miss out, as you say, on those opportunities because they are undervaluing them. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
One thought comes to mind, circling back to the question you asked about differences around men and women. I was saying women sometimes fear being seen as demanding too much. One thing that I often say is that it's so important that if you feel that way or you have that fear or anticipate that you will be seen as someone who's very demanding, is actually start the negotiation off with gratitude before you even ask for anything. And so I've helped a lot of women get the courage, because if I say, you know what, I appreciate the opportunity to come and just learn about the program, and then I go into an ask, it is very different than just asking for what you need right away. And so before you ask for anything, find something excited about the opportunity or the university. Express appreciation and gratitude, and then clarify what's being offered before you begin to have a conversation about what your wants and needs. It can be a game changer for people who have the fear, especially women, around being too demanding when it comes to negotiating. So that was the thought that I wanted to circle back to.
Yes, and I think that's such an important point. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I find not only in negotiating for whether it's a salary increase, but I rarely hear other people talk about this. And I am a big advocate that as well, Christina, that even if it's complaining about a hotel room, it is ingrained in me now. I always make a point when I call down or meet with the manager or however that plays out, of saying, your staff are really friendly. I love this about the facility. I love that. And then you lead in, and invariably it is so much more well received. And I get way better outcomes from those discussions than if I just went in pure complaining mode. Same in our relationships. If you're going to have a difficult conversation with your intimate partner or your kids, start with the stuff that you love or appreciate from that place of gratitude, as you say. I think that's such great advice. Now, I'd love to circle back just briefly about negotiating sort of in the academic environment as well. Like, how would you say, what are some of the differences negotiating in academia as compared to your other typical negotiations, and any tips you have for how to navigate your negotiations in that environment?
Yeah, academia is unique. When you compare to other jobs, many times it's a 9-month appointment. And so when you're getting offers, you're really thinking about that offer within a 9-month increment. And so you typically have summers, which might involve a different set of negotiating. I think that as academia changes, there's really opportunities to negotiate what your job looks like. So while salary is one component, you could also negotiate where you work, how often you work, what days you work. And so it really goes beyond numbers. While numbers are very important, but there's a lot of flexibility and possibilities as well as it relates to negotiating the actual offer. But the way that we work, how often we work, the days we work, and when we work becomes vastly different compared to other workspaces. And so I always encourage people when they're interviewing to make sure that they get very clear on what the university or program or college is saying comes with the package or comes with an offer, because having that information becomes important. It looks so different depending on what institution you're interviewing at. It's vastly different depending on how much money that department has and how long that department has been around.
Yeah.
And that information can become a really awesome foundation so that you can go home, prepare for the offer, which often comes several weeks after you do an on-campus visit on average.
Yeah. And what about their kind of unusual hierarchies, for want of a better term, in sort of the academic world? How does that play into the negotiations and how maybe you show up?
Yeah, so there are definitely a number of titles and roles that people have within the university. And again, it does vary. It does depend on institution and department.
Yeah.
There are times in which people will be negotiating with a dean or a departmental chair. There's also opportunities to negotiate with search committee chairs, are a different role, but it really impacts who you have an opportunity to. Knowing that information up front gives you some information on who you will be negotiating with. And it also will help inform decisions on maybe titles that you would like to negotiate as you enter into that role. And so you can negotiate becoming an assistant professor. You can negotiate how quickly you go up in rank as an associate professor and so on. So there are these ranks set up and they vary so differently across universities. And based on your rank, to some extent, will depend on the type of power and authority that you would have within that department.
Yeah. And it's great. I love that you're speaking about this who. I mean, one of my models is, I call it the 5W model. And the first W is who. And so few people consider that. So I think it's great that you touched on that. Like, be really intentional about thinking, who are you negotiating with? Who should you be negotiating with? Well, how does that change the dynamic depending on who you're negotiating with? And who do you want to show up as in that particular negotiation? And just getting really intentional about all of those elements of who can really be a game changer in how you show up, how it's received, and getting those better outcomes. So I think that's such a great point. And I'd love your insights on what advice or tips you have about negotiating with bullies or people with more power, because I mean, that certainly comes up often, I'm sure, in the academic world, as it does in any negotiation. So for our listeners out there, get your pad and pen ready, because I'm sure you've all experienced this at some point.
So unfortunately, met a few of those bullies in the process, but I do believe that it's so important to really hold your vision close to you and be very clear on what your vision is and who you are. And so that when I am communicating with people who might be a bully and or have strong personalities or who might be very demanding, I communicate my vision with a level of conviction. I'm very clear on the impact my wants and needs have on myself, will have on the department, will have on the university. I take it a step further and get clear about the impact that will have on student body and the community, as well as what I believe my impact will have on the field. And so I take it away from it being personal and really getting clear with the person, letting them know, I've done my homework. I understand what this request means. And I would be very interested in learning about what resources are available to support this vision. And this is why this vision could be a win-win solution for both of us.
Yeah. Oh, Christina, I love your approach. Okay. As you're saying, it's like firing off so many parallels. Because when you're talking about that impact, like who does that impact? Under my 5W model, that's one of the parts of the who as well. Like as you go through, who you're negotiating with, who do you want to show up as, who should be at the table, and who is going to be impacted by this decision. So important and so often forgotten in a negotiation. And when you're talking about your vision under my 5W as well, that's that why, right? Again, just having that simple model so people can get intentional about these things. Because man, holding on to that vision, holding on to your deep why can really move the dial, especially when things get tough. If you're dealing with that somebody who's got more power, bullying, you're able to ground yourself really quickly again and why you're there. Why is this important? And it allows you to stay focused. And you also talked about your homework, which I think preparation is so important. And I love your insights on what role preparation plays in effective negotiation. And what do you see as the most important elements of preparation in your view?
Yeah, so there's many steps I think to preparing, but two would include the importance of just practicing, talking to yourself on your own, talking to yourself in the mirror, role playing with a friend that you feel safe with, talking it over with a mentor. A form of practice is asking someone what their experiences were and learning from their experiences, not allowing that experience to discourage them, but really glean and figure out what could that person have done better or differently to really improve your personal experience. So I would say practice would be key. But another form of preparation a lot of people don't do oftentimes or wait to the last minute is I think before you even apply to get clear on who you are, because that will help justify and guide some of your requests. I'll give you an example. A lot of times people will focus on their resume or their curriculum vitae to justify what they're asking for.
Yeah.
But your orientation and your identity and who you are is actually enough to help describe why you're making a specific request. So an example would be, if I see myself as a very applied researcher who wants to keep teaching hands-on, I might ask to do my classes inside of a juvenile facility and not even deal with the classroom at all. I may not have done it before, but because my orientation is that I'm an applied teacher and I want to make theory come to life for students, that alone will help justify and help provide some foundation to my request. And so part of preparation is getting clear on who you are as a researcher. Service is a part of the job, as a service provider, as a mentor, as someone who's going to participate on committees and administrative work. And then also, what does your research look like? And that same who later on, once you get your offer and job and you say yes, should also help guide your yeses and nos throughout your process, the tenure, promotion, and beyond. And so when someone asks you to do something that's not really in alignment, you can say, you know what, try asking this other person, because right now, who I am really encompasses these types of activities.
Yeah.
And so it allows you to really manage relationships after you get a job.
Wow. Mic drop. So many beautiful, practical implement tips there. So again, for our listeners, like go back and replay that portion there, because there were a lot of mic drop moments there, really important, simple things that you can do to prepare to increase your likelihood of getting those better outcomes in your negotiations. I just love that answer, Christina. And what role have you seen in your experience that emotion plays in negotiations?
I would say anxiety, fear is probably the most reported type of feeling that people will report in general. Very few people say, I'm very motivated, I'm very excited about it, and they're pumped. But that does come up at times, which is exciting. But a lot of times people say, I feel very nervous about this. Because I often start off with saying, okay, how do you feel about negotiations? Where are you when I'm working with individuals? And so I think with that, part of the management around a lot of the fear and anxiety really comes down to, and this is just one strategy, is really the management of our minds and our thought processes and what we're thinking. We can induce fear just by a negative thought.
Yes.
We can create a negative narrative that will cause us to start sweating bullets and start, reacting in very nervous fashions.
Yeah.
We can also induce happiness by creating thoughts of joy and peace. And that also will help us and evoke calmness.
Yeah.
And so we have to be very clear that when we're in these situations that often feel vulnerable, the last thing we need to do is focus on our deficits,
Yeah.
focus on why we are not good enough. At that moment, you receive an offer, you decide to go on the market. You're only thinking productive thoughts. You're only focusing on your assets. You should be so busy teasing apart why you are a great asset to that department, that school, into this world, that you don't even have room and capacity to entertain the negative thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to go beyond your resume to do that. You have to go beyond your curriculum vitae, and you really have to figure out who you are as an individual and know that you are in this earth for a reason and there is a purpose. And so with that becomes your ability to really deal with some of the nervousness and anxiety that will come up. But even if you remain nervous, I tell people, do it scared, do it anyway. Even if you have to do it sweating bullets. There are times I negotiate and I will stutter my way to a better offer. I will sweat my way to a good opportunity because, again, I know that there's a purpose. There's something that I'm here to fulfill and do. And so if this is an opportunity for me, the door will be open. And so to be able to lean in with that conviction has helped me deal with anxiety and nervous. But still today, I get nervous and I help people around negotiating. But I do know by managing our thoughts, it can be a game changer because now we're building affirmations of positivity that helps us and reminds us who we are and what we're capable of.
I love that. Sweated your way to better outcomes. That was so good. And such an important insight that you shared with us. And I find even a lot of the negotiation experts out there who are advocating miss this critical piece. I mean, I actually wrote a mini book on negotiating your mindset. Our first and most important negotiation is negotiating our mindset. And you just hit on all of the key reasons why that is so important. So again, thanks for sharing that. I love it. And in your experience, what do you find are some of the key reasons why negotiations end up failing?
One of the big reasons, and this happens a lot from people from marginalized backgrounds or underrepresented groups, is forgetting that everything is negotiable.
Yes.
So sometimes culturally, you can get so fixed on what the rules are that you forget there's actually exceptions to rules. And those exceptions are made often. And so remember, everything is negotiable can be a huge game changer, I think, for many people.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I'm glad that you're talking about that for marginalized groups, because I do think that's a key area where, much like I've talked about gender, but as you say, whether it's based on race or any other background where a group feels marginalized or historically have been oppressed, I mean, recognizing and stepping up to own your value and getting really intentional can make such a difference on that. I think that's so powerful. So thank you for that. And what do you see are the key sort of hallmarks that you think make for a great negotiator?
Yeah, one of the things I actually talk about in my book, and it deals with, I say J is for jump, and the importance of not jumping to conclusions and collecting all the data before you make a conclusion. A lot of times, and this can be outside of work, even with relationships, right?
Yeah.
We have to really be observers and data collectors. And then we have to make sure that the data we're collecting will allow us to jump to the conclusion we're actually trying to make.
Yeah.
And so there has to be an alignment with the information that you collect and the story that you've created. And if you created a story that's not linked to data, make sure you collected more information and ask more questions. And so when we're evaluating relationships, for instance, and we want to know if someone is a provider, we might choose their choice of restaurant to determine that. Well, that might not be the best data point to understand if someone is a provider or not. And so collect the data, ask the questions, and then make sure that the data you're collecting will help you jump to the conclusion that you're ultimately, or the conclusion that you're hoping to make throughout that observation.
Yeah, so good. J for jumping. I love that. And one of the things I always talk about is the 7 deadly sins. And I thought of it when you said jumping, because I'm like about people jumping straight to business as well. In
Mm.
North America, we have such a tendency to just jump right in without any of the rapport building that helps sort of set the foundation. So I love your J for jumping is great. And I just wanted to circle back, because one of the things that was percolating here when you talked about how important it is to recognize that everything is negotiable, and definitely in the context, as you say, if it's a salary, negotiation or performance evaluation, recognizing its titles and training and everything is negotiable. And also, I just want to put a pin in that for our listeners, even broadening that concept further. Everything is negotiable in terms of your life. And we often don't think of, your relationship or those difficult conversations with your intimate partner or with your kids or service providers, whether it's insurance companies or the bank. All of those are a form of negotiation as well. So I love that concept that you're putting a pin in, that everything is negotiable. And so many relationships that we don't think of as even being negotiations are. And when you make that switch, you show up differently, because then you can prepare and decide who you want to be and get more of what you deserve in life. I think that's such an important point.
Absolutely. And it really allows us to make negotiations a habit. And so when we think about practicing, if we practice in every domain in life, whether it's us interacting with a clerk at the store, or
Yes.
raising our children, working with our partner, working on the team, if we make it just a part of life, right, that practice really does add up. So then when it is something really important, you will be ready, you will be prepared.
Yeah. And when you're saying about that practice piece, again, circling back to that, because I think it was such an important point, and I kind of jumped right on to the next thing, but you'd mentioned whether it's with a friend in front of the mirror, because if the first time you're making your ask for something big that maybe is outside your comfort zone is in the actual negotiation, your voice is going to betray you. You're not going to have the confidence. You're going to end up second guessing yourself. So I really wanted to put a pin back in that. Practice in all your relationships. And for any particular negotiation, practice in advance of that negotiation, as Christina so beautifully modeled and shared for us here today. So I cannot believe how much information you have packed in for us in such a compressed time here, Christina. This has been just fantastic nuggets, absolute gold in this interview. And I normally like to end by asking, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've ever had in your life? And again, it doesn't have to be about negotiation. This can be just anything, one of those moments where it shifted how you looked at something and allowed you to show up differently or better.
Yeah, mine is about negotiating. Even before I started doing work in the area of negotiating, and that is everything is negotiable.
Yeah. So powerful. So powerful. And I can't thank you enough, Christina. As I say, I think this has been great. I'm going to go back and re-listen myself and jot down some notes and borrow some of your nuggets in my sort of teaching and negotiation. I think we've got a beautiful perspective. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And for our listeners out there, make sure that you check out, I want you to learn more about Christina. Again, definitely check out her book. It's called The ABCs of Negotiating. For people who can see it, I'm going to hold it up for you here. And where can they get that actually, Christina? Where would you recommend is the best place for people to grab that book of yours?
The best place is Amazon.com. It's available internationally, so you can get it regardless of what country you live in. Check it out. It's a quick read. It's for adults, but it's written in a way that you could even share with your loved ones and your children. I would say 9 years and above. I work with my 9-year-old on these very concepts every day.
Nice. Oh, I love that you do that. I think that's so great, because really negotiation is probably one of the most important skills we'll ever learn in life. And yet we're either not taught it at all, or to the extent we're taught it, we're taught based on these myths like toughness carries the day, and person talking the loudest and the longest is the person who's winning. And nothing could be further from the truth. People who are talking too much in a negotiation, they are not winning. They are ceding control, frankly, of the negotiation. So definitely check out that book for our listeners there. We'll make sure to put that info in our show notes. And also you can learn more about Christina, check out whether personally or for her, what do you call it? Is it your Academy 180, I think? Is that?
Yep, Academe 180.
Academe 180. I love that. So, and for Christina personally, it's drchristinaalicia.com. You can check out her personal website, or academe180.com for her book and other insights and workshops and things that Christina does as well. And we'll make sure to put those links in the show notes as well. And just so you know, that academe is ACADEME. So just think academic, take off the IC and put an E there instead. And I'm sure you've all just got tons of value from this episode. I know I certainly have. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't. As Christina and I have been talking about, all of life is a negotiation. So this is definitely a skill set that we can all afford to be looking to up-level our skills. I love this podcast because I get interesting guests who always increase and broaden my horizons as well. So definitely make sure to share it with anyone that you think could get some value from the message. And feel free to check out our Women on Purpose community as well in facebook.com/groups, Women on Purpose community. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, as always, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out, start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.
Thank you.